Oh, hey, Master Atsushi. Haha, you're here! Yes. So, I was wondering, I've been trying to work out my favorite monsters. What are yours? Do you even really have to ask that question? Well, I wouldn't want to assume. Have you even seen my armor? Oh, I guess you're right. It's clear that your favorites are Royal Ludroth and Gerardus. What? Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, welcome one and all to something that has been building up for a long time. Now I feel like I've finally had enough time to properly ruminate on the monsters of Monster Hunter Rise, and I'm ready to confidently share my tier list of the monsters based around a combination of their design itself, which I do personally weigh quite heavily, and then the fight that they have. When I say the fight, I don't necessarily mean one specific aspect. Difficulty is a bit of a factor, just because it defines how interesting a moveset is allowed to be generally, but I also put a lot of stock into monsters that do things that no other creature does, and especially when it perfectly fits their initial design as well. With that said, this is of course my list, how I feel about the monsters, so you may not agree with some of my choices. 'Tis the nature of the beast. I'll be going relatively quickly today as we have 43 entries to dig into across the game as a whole, and as such I will be limiting myself to a maximum talking time per monster of the length of their intro cutscene, aside from monsters that literally don't get one of those. All the bookkeeping aside then, let's bash on through in the order that Josh and I fought these monsters in the Pro and Noob series, beginning with Great Izuchi. This is tied for my all-time favorite of the really low-tier raptor monsters in the series with Great Macau from Generations Ultimate, but unfortunately being one of these raptors limits his fight creativity significantly, so he's in my C tier. I still appreciate him, but low-tier monsters sort of get the short end of the stick. Following that up with Arzuros, I love bears. They are easily one of my favorite animals, and Arzuros is basically just a big classic honey bear with some mean old claws. He gets a bit of a bonus though in Rise for stealing your honey and eating it right in front of you if he pins you when you have honey in your inventory. He's landed for me neatly in the B tier. Next up then is Great Baggy, who is neat. I like his hair a lot, and you have to give him some credit for having sleep status, which is unusual, but he's sort of extremely basic. D tier for me. He fills his purpose well. After that is Lagambi, the fluffy bunny rabbit trying to beat you up so hard you'll say,
What's up, Doc?
his design is impeccable and his fight is funny, but at some points it can cause me quite a bit of frustration. Overall, he's a very solid B tier monster in my opinion. Coming up next is Acnosum, beautiful creature, umbrella-headed crane transforming crest shape to various weapons, very knightly aura, and goddamn bouncing fire attacks. Fantastic monster. Very clear-cut S tier. Yes, that's high for an early game monster, but the design in Rise has just absolutely blown me away, as proven by the next creature on the list, Tetranodon, the giant Kappa sumo wrestler, the platypus build jewel-studded stud himself. His fight perfectly matches his personality, and his personality is lovable as all hell, especially to someone like me who prefers my monsters a bit on the thicker side of things. Tetranodon is once again an S tier monster. Maybe less interesting mechanics going on in the fight than Acnosum, but I do have a soft spot for his design in particular. After that, we have Great Roggy. The cowboy armor that he gives you is a massive boon to our fashion game as hunters, but he is still one of those basic raptors whose fight reflects that. He doesn't have a whole lot of interesting attacks. He'll join his brother Baggy in the D tier. Following that is Spongemane Cinderpants, the most absorbent and porous monster in the Flooded Forest. He's a design that I enjoy with a fight that I can live with. I'm gonna stick him happily in my B tier. Next up, Pukei-Pukei, and I do quite like this monster. I always have, but in Rise some of his color changes are more pronounced, and he gains a couple of interesting moves along with the pace of his fight, increasing quite a bit for me. Pukei-Pukei is a total A tier monster in this game. Big ups for the little bird man. After that, Barroth, who conflicts me greatly. His fight is a little bit frustrating as someone who mainly plays blunt weapons, but I cannot deny loving his animation where he rolls around in the mud. It completely redefines the way that I think about him and his personality as a whole, almost like a dog just having a good time rolling around in the dirt, playing around rather than a scary, hard-headed monster. He's a solid tier B After which comes Kulu-Ya-Ku, who I actually enjoy quite a lot in Rise. He's still a raptor, I guess. I wouldn't necessarily call him part of the basic raptor group. He's got a bit more of an interesting shape going on, bit more moveset going on as well. He's a cut above those standard raptors for sure. The fact that he actually uses weapons is interesting. And on top of that, he now actually occasionally takes out a face, which I love. He's a great B-tier monster. Flying in with a bang afterwards is Bishaten. Oh my god, the first true glance into what Rise had to offer, I am still absolutely enamored with this creature. The way that he looks, the way that he moves on a movement-to-movement basis, the fact that he throws fruit and then you can also throw the fruit back at him. Not to mention that he prances, he basically break dances. He's just insanely cool, especially for his difficulty level. The first S+ monster on my list, which he takes easily. In other words, Bish not quite a 10. But Bish a 9.5. After him, we have Volvidon, the roly-poly bear with the crazy long tongue who likes to use farts as a weapon. He's one of the most unique designs that I have seen in the series, and I generally view him as being significantly underrated by everyone. He's a wonderful little A-tier monster for me personally. I love him just in general. And then following him up is Tobi-Kadachi, the flying squirrel snake. He's a very solid monster, and his fight is good, but when surrounded by the amazingness of many of these Rise fights, I feel like he's sort of just fallen a little bit by the wayside as far as his fight's improvements, almost as if he was bitten in the neck by a larger fanged wyvern or something. For me, in Rise, Tobi is tier B. After which is the great evil himself, Magnamalo! I love a lot of his design from a visual standpoint, and I adore his fight, but I simply don't understand this monster from a biological perspective. Yes, I know suspension of disbelief is important in this series as a whole, but I need something to properly explain what's going on with him. He's just far more magical feeling than most creatures in the series, and as a result, I have him in my tier A for the moment. Next up is a pebble that I found on the ground. I named him Basarios, and then he came to life. I've always loved this monster conceptually, even though he can be a little bit frustrating as you are literally attacking a rock. He looks just gorgeous in Rise 2. As a whole, on the pros and cons, I've landed in a very middling place, with Basarios as a B-tier monster for me. Then we've got Somnicanth knocking the door down, walking right in. She is an absolutely gorgeous creature, very uniquely shaped and visualized. The fight is incredibly unique, and honestly, there just aren't enough sleep monsters in the series. As a whole, I've decided to slap her into my S tier. It feels right. She's an incredible monster, but there are just a few that I personally consider a touch more special. After her, we've got Barioth. He's pretty good. I like his design. His fight is probably the best that it's ever been. Fantastic hitboxes in Rise 2, absolutely. For me, he is a solid tier B. Next up is Mizutsune, and I absolutely adore Mizutsune. When I first encountered him in Generations, I found the idea of a soapy Leviathan sort of ridiculous in terms of the believability, which made it harder for me to give in to the beauty of the creature, but over time I've softened. As more monsters with various substances have been introduced, or at least shown to me that I didn't know them before, it seems a lot more believable now, which plays a big part in my increased adoration of him. Not to mention that I really enjoy the pacing of his fight and Rise. He's a total S-tier monster, in my opinion. After that is the classic red draconic Rathalos. I joined the series at a time where he was very comparatively anticlimactic for me compared to a lot of my first monster encounters, so I don't have quite the nostalgia factor with him that a lot of people do. He is a perfect design, but a perfect design of something very safe, very comparatively simple to a lot of what monsters have become. His fight is better than it was in World, but comparative to me to the other monsters in Rise, I consider it quite middle of the pack, landing him for me firmly in B tier. Then comes Anjanath. I have an undeniable soft spot for brute wyverns just in general, and I love proper classic T-Rex style dinosaurs, so Anjanath being exactly that, but mixed with vulture elements and getting a significant boost in both how interesting his fight is and how strong he is as a whole in Monster Hunter Rise. He's clearly an A tier monster for me. Next up, Nagakuga, who is a very interesting creature, but for whatever reason, he's just never really clicked with me quite as much as he does for a lot of people. I think that he's great, but personally, he doesn't massively stand out, so I have him sitting in my B tier. After which is Apex Arzuros, the first Apex creature on the list. This one is a bit odd for me. I appreciate what he is in that he is a very significantly harder version of Arzuros, but it's not done in a particularly compelling way to me. So he shares the same tier as base Arzuros in tier B. Following him up is the Kazoo, whose design I do love in a weird way, but his fight just gives me the heebie-jeebies. I know that is the intention, and so it's probably really good, and that's a good design reaction, but goddamn, the veins on this lad! He has landed firmly in my B tier. And after him comes a monster that I held as being my least liked monster in all of Monster Hunter World, the just singularly lowest tier, Gerardus. Well, in Rise, that's changed. He's better. His fight is now properly unique as he acts a lot more purposefully as a sort of ranged monster. And honestly, most of the negative opinion that I had of him is just entirely erased now, leaving him for me in the B tier. Next up is Zinogre, everyone's favorite power wolf, who has a bit of extra power in Rise. He looks insanely good, and his moveset has had a couple of neat changes. As a result of those things, combined with just liking him before this game in general, he is in a well-deserved A tier for me. Following him up is Wind Serpent Ibushi, the first Elder Dragon of Rise. This creature was absolutely mesmerizing for me the first time that I saw him. I hope that one day we'll be able to fight him outside of the Rampage so I can fight him more often without sitting through the Rampage part beforehand. The way that he plays with wind and dragon as a combined element is awesome to be a part of, and he is an unforgettable creature, putting him solidly in my S tier. Following him up, and then we get into the real end section of the game, Rachna Kadaki, the Spider Queen, mother of weapons, first of her fucking name. God damn, is she just one of the tippity-toppest creature designs I have just ever seen. Not just Monster Hunter, but ever. I cannot possibly fit enough words into this time period to express my love for her, but her fight is so mechanically deep, is so unbelievably unique, and so perfectly fitting for her personality. Her design as a whole, just, it gives me life. Rachna Kadaki is the first monster to go on my S++ tier. I genuinely believe that this creature is an example of 10 out of 10 Monster Hunter doing what it does best, at least for my preferences. After her is Gosarag, the serial killer Yeti Papa Wampa himself. A lot of what I just said about Rachna applies here too. The design is just incredible, one of the greatest that I personally experienced in games. He's also the first high-tier bear-shaped creature that we've had, and that means a lot to me. The ice blades are both fantastic and essentially allow his personality to shine through perfectly. This is one of those monsters whose design, just as a base creature, and his fight feel so incredibly, perfectly intertwined that I can't think of one without the other even remotely, because his design comes through in every single animation of the fight, and his combat influences how strongly I feel about his serial killer personality, and how much it really reinforces the way that the game wants you to feel about him. He is the second S++ tier monster on this list for me, another perfect Monster Hunter creature. Then we have Tigrex, who I enjoy quite a bit. However, things in Rise have just dialed it up to 11. As a result, I feel like some things, like him, while excellent, are just trying to compare to a whole new level of game design, so he lands firmly in my B tier. Following that is Almudron, the lobster-tailed Goldbeard Sadeastan. God, he's just so cool. The mud ball, the actual terrain affecting attacks, the way that he looks, and I think I enjoy his fight way more than the average person does based on how I've heard people talk about him, so keep that in mind for me when I say to you that he is an S+ monster. Absolutely incredible. Next up comes Diablos, whose smoky mouth effect I like and whose fight I enjoy, but he's just a very standard Monster Hunter experience, for me, putting him in the B tier. Then we have Rajang, and oh man, Rajang, you have had a little bit of a facelift in my opinion. Your visuals and design are still great, but now I like your fight much more than any previous version. It's still hard, but now it feels way more like learnably hard. You've done very well for yourself, my friend. Enjoy your placement in tier A. Then the final monster of the base game story, Thunder Serpent Narwa. Floating upside down once again, this beautiful creature unleashes straight up magnetism upon you. Her electrical power is just that strong, pulling rocks out of the floor and creating something extremely unique in Monster Hunter. An experience where you can almost just entirely ignore your weapon and follow these siege weapons around as they pop out of the ground. However, you are also not forced to fight her that way. You can fight her with weapons and be very effective, which sort of makes it even better. Her colors are great for me. I enjoy the whole thing completely. She's an S tier creature for me. After her comes Apex Rathian, who I am talking about before regular Rathian because we weirdly hunted her first in our playthrough. So it's regular Rathian, but much more fun. The extra backflip patterns make the fight way better. The dripping venom is cool as hell. The exploding gas that she does instead of fireballs sometimes also makes the fight much better. And she looks amazing, making her a solid A tier monster for me. Then we get to the glory of Apex Mizitsune. This one is really special in my opinion. Obviously, I've already told you that I love base Mizitsune, but this one gets straight up exploding hellfire bubbles, which is just such a cool swap. The color change is absolutely gorgeous, and the special moves added are all incredible to interact with. This monster is S+ tier for me personally, followed up by Bazelgeuse, the first monster of Update 2.0. God, what a glorious creature he is. I adore him so much. He was one of my favorite monsters from the new world as a whole, and to see him return and take up the mantle of his invader status, it makes me so happy. His fight is new and improved. It's glorious. I absolutely love that this is the case now. He's S+ tier for me, always has been. Following him up is Apex Rathalos, who I consider to be a good step up from regular Rathalos. My opinion might change in the future when we can fight him on a proper map, but as of right now, he's just Rathalos but better, and I've got him in my A tier as a result. Following him is normal base Rathian, because that's when we did it. Rathian, I don't like much personally, not a whole lot. Rathalos as King of the Skies is a good fit, a good creature design base. Rathian as Queen of the Land is a good match for him, for Rathalos, but she doesn't really hold up on her own for me. I think she's alright, but for me this is precisely where I draw the line of design distinction. Rathian for me is in tier C. After her comes Chameleos, who brought the return of the invisibility mechanic, and his design perfectly works into the game. He is a gorgeous creature with some of the most personality-filled animations possible. This one is harder for me to put my finger on why he's not higher, but it's something to do with the way that I feel when fighting him, having me place him on my S tier. Following him up is Apex Diablos, who I think really needs an out of Rampage quest to experience properly. He is fantastic looking and his new attacks are great, but he feels to me like he would be far better experienced outside of the confines of a Rampage arena. For now, I have placed him in my A tier. The penultimate entry then is, of course, Kushala Daora, the Dragon of Steel. In previous games, I have consistently said that I love his design, but his fight annoys the hell out of me. Well, in Rise, I still love his design, and his fight is actually fun to me, like properly enjoyable, not just serviceable, but a genuinely good fight. As a result, he's an easy inclusion for me into the S tier. And then finally, the last entry, Teostra, the Emperor of Flame. His design is cool, but for me, it's the fight that really stands out in Rise. He has multiple modes, affecting his attacks massively, as well as the way that he looks visually. It really ties him together for me, and thus he finds himself in my S tier. That's it. Every single large monster currently in Monster Hunter Rise split into my tier list. It's noticeable that overwhelmingly the newer creatures of Rise are near the top, and I think that just speaks to how willing to go for it the team has been doing here. The designs of the series are just improving and improving and improving over time, at least in my opinion. Of course, this list is very personal, and even if you agree with most of my placements, I'm sure that you have a couple of differing opinions going on yourself. As such, if there are any monsters that you disagree with my placement of, please fight for your creature in the comments below. Tell me why they should be higher. Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.